Good morning. It is Music and Stuff presented by Eureka Savings Bank, the best place to borrow, the best place to save. I'm Charles. I'm your host this morning at 8:03 in the morning, 29 degrees. And joining me in studio is Howard Johnson. Good morning.
Good morning, Charles. Nice to be here.
Great to be here with you. If you're not familiar with what Howard does, has done, and will be doing, you'll learn very quickly this morning. First off, where were you born? Where'd you grow up at?
Ottawa, Illinois. Grew up in Ottawa, Illinois.
The amazing Ottawa. So you were a pirate then?
I was a pirate. Then I was an Apache, I think, right? Isn't that what they called it at IVCC?
Yes.
Yes.
Way back in the day. Illinois Valley Community College.
Yes.
Yes, you and me both went through
graduate.
The hallowed halls. I wouldn't say a proud graduate for me. I attended until I decided to not get any more credits. That's as far as I went.
I had a friend who went there for 7 years, which is really tough to do.
Yeah, and not be a doctor, which I guess you can't do anyway at IVCC. But Howard Johnson's in the studio with us, and you started off in the area. You went to college. Where at?
Illinois State.
And you studied
down the road.
And you studied what?
I studied radio and television.
All right, so I'm going to leave now, and this show is all yours.
All right, this is what I've been hoping for all these years.
So you bounced around in radio for a bit here and there, all around Illinois Valley and a couple other states, and then came back, and that is sort of where your radio career sort of went away, like many of us hope would happen to us, and you moved on to something much funnier, as it were.
Yes, my radio career ended and until today.
Yeah, and now you're back, by the way.
I'm back. Yes, I'm back, baby.
And you'll be hosting this show every Sunday morning for perpetuity. I hate to break the news to you.
As long as I can do it from my home.
Oh, well, got bad news for you. So maybe Howard won't be joining us on the show every week, but he is going to be doing comedy in Chicago. It's sort of, you got your teeth sort of into comedy there. What was the moment that made you decide that being funny is a payoff to all this?
I don't know if there was one moment. Everybody kind of dips their toe in the water, just real gingerly. I moved to Chicago and decided, like so many people do, I'm going to take a class at Second City. And I did this. I took the first class, and I kind of thought this is where I should be. And so after my first class, which was like an 8-week class, Second City now has like thousands of students every year. And back then it was one room with Donnie DePolo teaching you. And it was 3 8-week sessions. And that was it. That's all they had. Now they do a lot more than that.
So what years were you at Second City? Or what year did you take the class at Second City?
Would have been 1983 I started at Second City.
And that would have been just when Second City was sort of becoming the hot thing then. Because you'd had some legends, I guess they're legends now. Then they were just the current comedians had gone through Second City at that time.
Yeah, well, everybody knew about, the first really big name television-wise, because there were a lot of names that came along all along the way. But the breakout was probably John Belushi. And then Bill Murray came along shortly after that. And there was a Second City in Toronto, and that's where you found people like Dan Aykroyd and Gilda Radner and the SCTV people. So they came along then. But what I found out was the man who taught all of these people that I just mentioned was actually, he had been fired from Second City for the third time, so badge of honor. He was a man named Del Close. And Del Close had just come back from New York, where he had worked on Saturday Night Live briefly. He was the house metaphysician at Saturday Night Live, and then he eventually left and came back to Second City and got fired from Second City for the third time and started doing his own sets of classes with the Improv Olympic, as was known back then. And he partnered up with Sharna Halpern, and they had been doing it for less than a year when I met Del Close at a party up in Evanston. And he found out that I wrote for Starlog and Fangoria magazines, and he glommed onto that. You're a Fangoria writer. Sharna, this man is a Fangoria writer. He must take classes with us. So I started taking classes with Del, and that was the very beginning of the I.O., because back then it was just known as the Improv Olympic. So I started studying there, and I was on the first house team of the Improv Olympic. I studied with, well, I had a lot of other students that went on to acclaim, I guess. One of my best friends early on was Bob Odenkirk, and we're still friends today. I'm happy to say Bob's a great guy. And so we started doing that. We started, and, you know, the IO slowly started growing, and you got all of these people just kind of jumping onto the bandwagon. We do shows every Tuesday night, and I think Tuesday night and Saturday night, Tuesday night and Friday night, whatever. But we started doing shows, and there was not that much of a comedy scene in Chicago outside of Second City.
Yeah.
But everybody started coming to our shows. And everybody from Second City that didn't have to work that night would come to our shows. Everybody from the Comedy Showcase would come to our shows. We became kind of a big, hot thing.
Was it because the tickets were cheaper, or was it actually the skill on stage?
I don't know how much they charged for tickets. I know we didn't get paid anything. So there was that. No, one night we got paid $15. So $15 for a year and a half's work. So
that's more than some people make in their entire life in comedy.
Well,
And
if I would have stayed in radio, who knows?
I think that's about $14.75 more than I've made. I'll tell you that right now. Howard Johnson joining us in studio. We'll take a break. We'll be back, and we're going to touch on international adventures.
Yes, and Common Creatives, which is the movie I'm starring in at the moment.
Exciting. We'll get to that after this. Music and stuff on WGLC. It's classic country. 100.1 WGLC. It's music and stuff. 8:10 in the morning. Joining us in studio, Howard Johnson, Ottawa native and comedy instructor.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Now, I hate to throw the insult at you. Those that can do, those that can't teach. That's not
completely true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the good thing is that self-deprecation is one of like the cornerstones of comedy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you can't let somebody else insult you, at least insult yourself.
You got to beat them to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Disarms
absolutely.
them anyway.
Yes.
So let's go to something that you have a passion for and that you've even gone to great lengths to know about and become a fan of. When did you first find the brilliance of Monty Python?
I don't know if I found them or if they found me on Channel 11 in Chicago. I saw, if not the first show, one of the very first shows broadcast in the U.S., because Channel 11, WTTW, was one of the very first stations to ever broadcast Monty Python. And this was back before Python had broken in America. They had their first film failed in America. They had record albums that were, available as imports.
Yeah.
But I was not very aware. I was a little aware, but not very aware.
So this would have been 68?
No, that's when they started in 69 in England. And then they started, it was 1974 over here. And I was just purely luck, happenstance, who knows. I was flipping through the dials on the TV, and it was a Sunday night, and I watched this program, something I'd never seen before.
Non sequitur from the advantage that Monty Python had over American comedy was that Monty Python believed in the hard edit of just we got to the joke, let's do something else.
Absolutely. Or if you wrote a sketch that had a good beginning and middle but didn't have an end, you ended it after the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the same thing. If it didn't have a good beginning but it had a good middle and end, you started in the middle.
And very self-aware. I mean, there were moments when, if you've ever watched Monty Python, where they not only know they're in a sketch show, they know the premise is ridiculous and silly, and they're actually asking the audience, why are you even watching this?
Yes, and with Monty Python, when they started doing the shows, they've been writing sketches for the BBC and for British television for several years, so they knew how to write sketches.
And the groups were like different pairings of them had done different shows together too, before they all came together to do the Monty Python experiment, I guess, as it were.
Yeah, it was all kind of mix and match a little bit, but they'd all work together on the Frost Report, which was David Frost's show. Everybody except Terry Gilliam worked on that. And so they'd all met and they'd all known each other, and they had worked together in different permutations. And so they had written all this stuff before, all standard sketches, just the kind you'd see in any variety show. And they got tired of doing this. And they got an offer. John Cleese got an offer to do his own show. And John had been working with Graham Chapman at that time. And John had always wanted to work with Michael Palin because Michael Palin had done a couple of shows with him before that. And so he said, I'd like to work with Michael. And Michael says, well, I'm working with Terry Jones. I'd like to work with Terry. And Eric Idle also has been working with us. And there's this guy that does animations, Terry Gilliam, and they just mashed it all together. And the result was this really strange, bizarre show that nobody had quite seen before.
So you saw that, you were inspired, and this is, again, pre-internet, pre-everything else. How do you go from there's this thing that was on WTTW at 11:05 on a Sunday night to I am going to find these guys and talk to them?
Well, here's the reason I did it. I was always a comedy geek, and I loved Laurel and Hardy and Buster Keaton and the Marx Brothers and W.C. Fields and the Three Stooges. And I always had kind of thought, boy, if only I had lived during the 20s or 30s,
Yeah.
I would have done anything to have been on the set with W.C. Fields or Laurel and Hardy or Keaton or any of them. And I recognized something in Python that was in the same spirit as those earlier comics. And I thought, this is the modern day equivalent of this. And these guys, other guys are all gone, but Python is just starting. So I want to be a part of this. So how do I do that? I had started with a few letters. They did a couple of personal appearances, and I was able to do, catch them in Chicago, Terry and Graham, at the Holy Grail premiere. I wrote what nowadays you would do a Python website, a fan website probably. There weren't websites back then. So I did a Monty Python fanzine.
And that's just basically writing your own little magazine and sending out to anybody who was willing to give you their address.
Fan magazine. Well, and money too. Yeah. But and that was totally it. And I sent it off to the Pythons, and I got back all these wonderful glowing letters of praise. They received it, and the manager passed it out at a Python meeting, which was good timing because they were getting ready to go to Tunisia to film Life of Brian about this time. And they sent back these almost embarrassingly wonderful letters, how much they loved what I was doing. And I ended up going to Tunisia when they were filming Life of Brian. And I worked on the film, and I was there for a month and a half, whatever it was.
And Life of Brian, a follow-up movie to some of their other projects, controversial in topic. They totally knew it going into it. They knew what sort of a hornet's nest they were going to be stirring up with it. But a lot of other folks showed up on that film too. They had some other actors with them as well, besides the regular cast of Python, and even George Harrison wandering through.
George was wonderful. That's the first time I met him. I got to know George a little bit there and a little better later on. George was the producer. What happened was they had the film all set to go, and then the head of the finance finally read the script. Mm-hmm. This was a big problem.
This is a little late in the process to be reading the script, mind you.
Well, it was like a week or so before they were going off to Tunisia. It was like in April of '78, I think. Yeah, and he finally read the script, and he said, I'm not giving you money for this. And so they had to scrounge up finance on their own. And what happened, Eric had befriended George.
Yeah.
George had met Michael and Terry G as well. And he was just kind of bemoaning what was going on. And George said, well, I'll give you the money.
Yeah.
And what? Do you know how much money we're talking about? Well, I want to see the movie.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened. George, there's some controversy over whether he mortgaged his house or not to finance this. Because I was going to write about this in one of my Python books, and I got back a letter from the office just asking me not to mention it. But it's common knowledge now.
And you're still not mentioning it.
Well, I think the statute of limitations is probably passed. Yeah.
More of our conversation with Howard Johnson continues after this. Music and Stuff on WGLC. It's Music and Stuff. It's Music and Stuff, presented by Eureka Savings Bank. Thank you.
Caught you.
Yeah, Gesundheit. On WGLC 820 in the morning on your Sunday, in studio hanging out with us this morning is Howard Johnson, Ottawa native, and Monty Python. What title do you want to give yourself? Geek? Nerd? I mean, I can throw a bunch at you if
Comedy
you like.
geek.
Comedy geek,
Comedy
that works.
nerd, whatever you want to say.
And became a massive fan of the Python, so much so that you went to go to Tunisia, clearly a popular tourist destination, to be there.
Believe it or not, it is in Europe. It's like people here go to Mexico, people in Europe go to Tunisia.
And of course, the Pythons went there to film Life of Brian, and you showed up there. What did you do when you showed up there? You know, were you like, I'm just here to take notes for the fanzine, and then they were like, well, while you're here, hold this.
Well, what happened was I had been in London the month before. It's been 1 week in London. I was working in radio at the time. I had 1 week's vacation, so I could only go over there for 1 week because I didn't want to lose that radio job. So I went over there for 1 week, and I met most of the guys again, stayed at Graham Chapman's house up in Highgate.
And lived to tell the tale.
And lived to tell the tale. Well, Graham had stopped drinking by that point,
okay.
so it was a little safer. But the next month, I remember the first day on the set, I think I was just, it was like a rehearsal, and I was just sitting and talking to Graham, and I bought a brand new camera before I went over there. And I remember showing Graham my camera. And so we went on to the set the next day. We started filming a day early. We weren't supposed to start filming on the Saturday, but we did because everybody was ready. Mm-hmm. And the still photographer hadn't shown up yet. So Graham said, well, Howard's got a camera. And I said, well, sure. What do you want me to do? And so I started taking still photos when they did the stoning sequence, because that was what we shot on the very first day. But I was a Roman soldier. I was a townsperson. I doubled for most of the guys at some point or another. I did pretty much whatever needed to be done. And it was handy to have somebody that was really enthusiastic, that wouldn't complain about anything, that was just happy to be there. Mm-hmm. And that's really what I did. I stayed there for the duration. Just
did the radio job exist when you got back?
It did exist shortly I think there was a little bit of a break. Yeah, my Ottawa radio was in 2 segments, I think. Yeah.
By the way, I was in this movie, and now I'd like to get my job back, please.
Yeah, of course, because why not?
Can I stop by your car dealership and talk about the cars for sale? Hi, I'm Howard. So the Life of Brian, it comes out, and you're like probably in awe at the theater, seeing glimpses of you. You're like, that's my shoulder. That's me walking in the pasture. Do you actually have any dialogue in the film? Do you shout anything or say anything?
Sort of. I am part of a crowd of about 900 people saying, behold his mother, hail to thee, mother of Brian,
and
blessed art thou.
And that's the very naughty boy.
Yes.
The very naughty boy sequence.
Classic comedy sequence. Yeah, totally.
Howard Johnson joins us, Monty Python nerd extraordinaire. Obviously, after doing Life of Brian, you were friends with the guys and helped them along in their other endeavors, especially when they came to the States.
They came in to do the Hollywood Bowl show. Monty Python Live at the Hollywood Bowl. That was in 1980. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I was in that show just briefly doing there's a bit called idioting, mm-hmm. where they come out and they're just dressed in really wacky, unrecognizable costumes. And after the dress rehearsal, Michael Palin said, we need to fill out the stage a little bit more. And, well, Howard will do it. And so they grabbed me, and so I was
And I've seen Monty Python Live at the Hollywood Bowl on VHS, I think, so I didn't realize you were in it. So
well, that bit is actually cut out of the final film.
Okay.
So I'm hoping they'll release the uncut version of that, because then you would see all the idioting. And I was a pantomime goose there. And the only other non-Python was Graham Chapman's adopted son, John. And I think he was dressed as a Christmas tree. So he came out on stage as a Christmas tree, I believe.
Of all the Pythons, Graham Chapman was the stories about Graham have just. I kind of think those are like stories, kind of like the Belushi stories, even like the Chris Farley stories today, of where you have people who are incredibly funny, who probably have demons, and the legends of their escapades grow bigger and larger than anything they actually did in real life.
Yeah, well, most of the wildest stories about Graham are pretty close to the truth. Usually there's a little more to them, and they're even wilder than you would want to know. Graham was wonderful. I mean, I used to stay at his house, whether he wanted me to or not, every time I went back to London for the longest time. Graham used to come through Chicago a lot more than any of the other Pythons. He'd come in, I remember he came out a couple of times promoting his autobiography. Then he came out doing speeches. After one book, he did an event at Facets Multimedia, and he asked me to get a recording of it, and he thought, well, I could do this for money. So he started doing tours.
Yeah.
So I got to see Graham a lot. There was one time in particular, I think might have been the very last time that I ever saw Graham. I was doing a show at the time, a comedy show at the Improv Olympic up at Cross Currents, and Graham was in town and he did a Saturday night show, but Friday night he came to see our show, and he loved it. He really enjoyed what we were doing. And so the following night, Graham had his show, and then after his show, he came back to Cross Currents and caught the tail end of our show. And I had a party at my apartment that night, this little rat trap apartment on North Racine at the time. And Del Close came over, and Graham came over, and Bill Murray came over. And there was only about a dozen other people.
Yeah.
And we just sat around and just listened to the three of them tell stories.
Yeah.
And at the end of the night, Graham was trying to get a film going, and he got Bill Murray and Del Close to agree to act in it. It never happened. Graham got sick and passed away.
Yeah.
But otherwise, they would have been in there.
So when did you write your first Python book?
My first Python book came out a week or two after Graham died, which was after the Python 20-year anniversary, which was early October 1989. Yeah. So it's kind of bittersweet, but I'm so glad I did it because I had interviewed Graham pretty extensively for that book. And fortunately I did, because, there's been a lot of Python books that have come out since then, but not with Graham interviews.
Yeah.
So I was glad to have done that. But, huge loss. It was really, really sad.
My introduction to Python was also on WTTW, but it was one of the compilation specials. And it was the one, I believe, hosted by Steve Martin.
Yes, that was actually the final thing they ever shot with Graham.
Yeah.
Just a few weeks before he died. There was a sketch that they put together, and the sketch never aired. It didn't turn out that well. But there was a moment where Steve Martin opens a cupboard, and all six of them are in there.
And that's one of my favorite moments, is you wonder, where is Monty Python now? And they're all right here in this closet. And that's it. That's the joke.
And that was the last time Graham appeared on camera with Python.
And it's a genius little gag that you spend the entire 2 hours watching the special going, these are really funny guys slapping each other in the face with fish and whatnot and doing terribly silly things, and the payoff to it is they just keep them stuffed in a room.
Yeah, exactly. Nice joke to go out on for Graham.
Howard Johnson in studio. Now, I wouldn't say after Python, because Python is still something you're involved with. You still, when any of the surviving members of Python, unfortunately we've lost another on the way, are in the States, you somehow always end up becoming in close proximity to them. Any restraining orders so far? Like Eric has probably told you to buzz off?
No, fortunately, he tells me that all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But, they come over less and less often now.
Yeah.
And Eric lives out in L.A., and he's like almost a recluse anymore. You never see him. But fortunately, I'm able to see John Cleese a lot.
Yeah.
Later on, at the end of the 90s or so, John asked me, he was moving to Santa Barbara, and he asked me to come and be his personal assistant. So I did that for several years. Lived in Santa Barbara, out in Montecito actually, and worked for John. And that's where I got dragged into comedy and comedy teaching a little bit. I'd done some improv teaching because that was my background. But when you're working across a desk from John Cleese every day for years, you learn a lot about comedy writing.
Now, I just in my mind, because I have to go back to that, sitting in a room across the desk from John Cleese, I just think that at any given moment, you can't tell if you're in the argument sketch. I just don't. Does he just berate you and you just don't know if you're, oh, okay, yes?
Well, John, believe it or not, is like possibly the best boss I ever had.
Yeah.
He studied management. He's written books about management techniques in business. And he knows psychology. So he's the best boss in the world. So he knows exactly what you're thinking and before you're thinking it. And it was an easy job. It was doing stuff that I loved doing. I ended up, we left Santa Barbara mid 2000s, I guess, and we ended up moving back here for a lot of reasons. But not because I didn't love John, I didn't love the job. But I've always, ever since then, I work for John. I do projects off and on. I'm kind of an American assistant, personal assistant for him. I was just in London in October, just working on a project for him, doing some research. I'm working on that project, and I'm going to be working, fingers crossed, on another project with him later in this coming year. And if that happens, you will hear all about it.
Well, depends on the nature of the project, I suppose. But yes.
In a good way.
Now let's talk about local, because again, we go from you being in London with John Cleese. I mean, movie star. Let's be realistic. John Cleese had a career after Python. In fact, you could argue that he'd had a more successful post-Python career than any other members of the cast.
Well, sure. He went on to create Fawlty Towers, it's just a legendary British comedy series that's almost as legendary over here. And then he wrote and sort of directed and starred in A Fish Called Wanda and was nominated for Oscars.
Yeah.
So there you go. You can't do much better than that. And he's 83 years old. He's got one, possibly two films that he's developing right now, waiting to hear about the one, and two stage shows that he's working on.
And at that age, to be grinding it out still, just impressive. But you go from that to you're in a local movie.
Yes, I am. But this is the first time of all the stuff I've done in comedy and show business type stuff. This is the first time I've ever starred in a film, and so yeah.
Did you tell the director that? Or did you lie?
I thought I kind of avoided the subject. I thought, do I want to mention this? Maybe not.
No, I've done tons of things just like this. Sure, no problem.
Yeah. Well, I think Reed Thomason was the director. And I think he was kind of made aware of me through his assistant director and producer, Griffin Tabor, because I knew Griffin. Griffin went to school with my son. And so Griffin was aware of me, and I'd been maybe a little light mentoring for Griffin. And I just got this message just totally out of the blue. Do you want to star in a movie? So I said, sure. I don't get this kind of offer every day, and most people never get that kind of an offer. So, yeah, I would love to do that.
I've turned down 4 movie roles already, by the way.
Yeah, I know, and you haven't even had breakfast yet. Yes, that's right.
I was checking my text a moment ago. Yeah.
What's keeping them?
Come
on. Okay. So Reed contacted me, and I was teaching up at Second City at the time because I teach comedy writing. And he came up between two of my classes, and he had me read for it, and I read for it like in 5 or 10 minutes later. Okay, you got the part. So, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And if you want to see the movie, we had Reed on last week, actually, to talk about this. But if you want to see the movie, it's out and about. There's a Facebook page, I believe you can go to.
Here's what's going on with the movie, because I was at a screening last night. There is there's going to be a post on Common Creatives Screening is the name of the Facebook page. It's going online. It's going to be on YouTube. I think all the information is going to go up in about a week. So check it out next weekend. Common Creative Screening.
I will buy my tickets to watch it on YouTube right now.
And you can. Well, you can't until you get that. But I think it's $5, and you've got the movie for 48 hours to watch to your heart's content.
I don't know if I could get that done. My schedule's so tight, but I'll try to get it worked in 48 hours. Howard Johnson joining us, Ottawa native and apparent movie star. He talked about upcoming projects with John Cleese. Any other irons in the fire for you? Maybe another book or...
Well, I'm helping John research his next book. I will say that. But more importantly, what I'm doing now to put bread in my family's mouths is I'm teaching at thecomedylab.net. I teach TV comedy writing because I picked up all of these skills. And also about 10 years ago, I started at the IO Theater substituting classes with Michael McCarthy. Michael McCarthy created the Comedy Lab, which teaches talk show writing. It teaches sitcom spec writing, teaches SNL sketch, and it teaches pilot presentations. So there's 4 classes. Those are the 4 main classes. And I'm very proud of what Michael put together. So I started teaching at the Comedy Lab, which was at the IO Theater at the time up in Chicago, and taught up. And Michael became ill a few years ago, and he had to turn the program over to me, and he made it for about 2 years through his cancer treatments and then passed away. So I've been teaching it for the last 5 years or so, solely on my own. And when the pandemic hit, I just took everything online. And up at that point, I was doing everything through the IO Theater. Now I'm pretty much online. So it's www.thecomedylab.net.
Thecomedylab.net. So go there if you want to sign up for classes. Reasonable rates, I assume?
Yeah, it's very comparable rates to any of the other.
I've got dozens of listeners of The Breakfast Show, my Monday through Friday show, kicking the radio right now saying Charles needs to take those classes ASAP because, oh boy. And it gets funny because, you talk about comedy writing and everything else. And it just, as I interject my own personality into everything, I find writing difficult. I find on the spot and impulse is so much better.
It's so much easier.
That too.
Not always funnier.
Okay. I will say this.
As your listeners will know.
For me, considering I haven't, I don't go out of my way to write, then it's always going to be better because therefore I got nothing to compare it to.
Well, here's the thing about writing versus improvisation. What's the difference? You tell me.
I suppose you know what the destination is in writing. In improv, you don't necessarily know the destination. You don't know where you're going to fall off the cliff at.
That's very good. Yeah, I like that. I was going to say it's about precision of language.
Yeah.
And the ability to rewrite things, because things never get good when you write them. They only get good when you rewrite them.
Yeah.
What's the one thing that a TV comedy script and an essay and the back of a shampoo bottle have in common? They've all been rewritten.
That's true.
Everything is rewritten. And that's one of the things I really lean into with my students. It's all about, things get good when you rewrite them.
And you get more efficient. Efficiency is the key, too. There's a lot of words in the English language, and you don't have to use them all.
What's the secret of comedy writing, or the secret of writing in general?
You're putting me into loss here. I'm supposed to be interviewing you.
I'm giving you guys all of this gold. It's just laying around.
It's weird because now you're just filling out an invoice for me, and this is it's literally like $6 a question I owe you now.
It's 3 words: write every day. You write every day, you get good, or you give it up.
Yeah,
one way or the other. So that's what I do. That's what I teach with the Comedy Lab. Is these different kinds of writing. And if you want to get a packet together, if you want to get representation, we teach you how to get representation. If you want an agent, because you're not going to get very far without an agent. So you write every day. But I've got students that it's usually a few-year process after you've taken the classes to finally get good enough to get hired. But now I've got students that I've got one student that gets published regularly in the New Yorker, online. I've got another student that's now working for Stephen Colbert on the TV show.
Wow.
And I've got other students that are starting to break through. And it's really, really nice to see.
Yeah. Yeah, the best I have going is the Swap Shop here on WGLC. That's as close to comedy writing as I get. But it's always a fun time. Glad to have you here in the studio to talk about your upcoming projects, talk about all the fun things you have going on. Don't be a stranger, of course. You're always welcome back. Just, pound loudly on the door. We'll see if we let you in.
It's worked so far.
Yeah.
Well, Common Creatives is the big thing. Go to Facebook, Common Creatives Screening, and by next weekend, you should be able to download it and watch it for yourself.
And again, your website, if somebody wants to toss you money and learn comedy from at least one of the top 11 funny people I know. 12.
11. I thought I broke through.
Yeah. And there was
Still hoping.
There's a cashier at the gas station who always has a witty joke every day.
Those cashiers. They
ranking
hear 'em
a little
all.
above you there.
They always hear them first.
And again, your website for classes?
TheComedyLab.net.
TheComedyLab.net. Howard Johnson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Charles. A lot of fun.
It is Music and Stuff presented by Eureka Savings Bank. The best place to borrow, the best place to save.